Today's video is kindly sponsored by Policy Genius. Find out more later in the video. Hey, 42 here. When you meet someone new, what's the first thing you learn about them? Perhaps it's that they're allergic to seafood, or that they only drink single malt whiskey with 2 ice cubes in a straw, but more often than not, it's going to be their name. And these simple monikers affect more than just our first impressions. There's a growing body of evidence suggesting that our names can influence our personalities, our careers, our health, and even our love lives. So, what's in a name? Quite a lot, apparently. In the 1990s, readers of New Scientist magazine began to notice that a surprising number of scientific studies were carried out by researchers with remarkably well-suited surnames. There was a book on polar exploration by Daniel Snowman, an article on incontinence by Splatt and Whedon, and a subterranean guide to London by Richard Trench. These anecdotes led to a theory that people tend to gravitate towards careers that fit their names. And as the reports flooded in, the magazine decided to give this phenomenon a name of its own: nominative determinism. One area where nominative determinism has already been well documented is healthcare, largely thanks to studies carried out by the esteemed doctors Lim, 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 and Lim. Inspired by the fact they shared a rather fitting surname themselves, the 4 Lims decided to see whether healthcare-related surnames cropped up in the medical profession more often than would be expected through chance or circumstance alone. And it turns out they very much do. If you have someone who relies on your financial support, whether it's a child, an aging parent, or even a business partner, you need life insurance. Policy Genius makes it super easy to compare quotes from over a dozen top insurers, all in one place. Meaning you could save 50% or more on life insurance by comparing quotes with Policy Genius. And that's because the licensed experts at Policy Genius work for you, not the insurance companies. That kind of service has earned Policy Genius thousands of 5-star reviews across Trustpilot and Google. The best part is, eligible applicants can get covered in as little as a week. That's why this exclusive policy was recently rated #1 by Forbes Advisor. So, how does it work? Well, first you need to head over to www.policygenius.com/42. And in minutes you can work out how much life insurance coverage you actually need and compare personalized quotes to find your best price. Then, when you're ready to apply, the Policy Genius team will handle the paperwork and scheduling for free. Policy Genius. When it comes to insurance, it's nice to get it right. A particularly strong trend for job-related names was found in urology, an area of medicine concerned with the urinary tract and male reproductive organs, where the Lims found an abundance of dicks, cocks, and balls. There was even a Texas-based vasectomy specialist called Dr. Dick Chop. And if that's not a self-fulfilling prophecy, I don't know what is. Examples of nominative determinism exist outside of the sciences too. Look at Usain Bolt, the record-breaking sprinter, or Sue Yu, an aptly named lawyer from America. Then there's Mr. Fillin. He's a substitute teacher. And Rich Richie, who's an investment banker. And it's not just people's jobs that seem to be affected. Consider Vania Stambolova, the Bulgarian athlete who stumbled over the first hurdle of her 400-meter sprint at the London Olympics in 2012. Or Will Drop, the Montreal window cleaner who died in a fall. On the same day Will Drop dropped to his death, inmates Will Byrne and Frizzle were sent to the electric chair. Now, I have to admit, I am kind of cherry-picking here. For every athlete, doctor, lawyer, and criminal with a seemingly perfect name, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, without. The most common doctor's name in Britain is Khan, which means nobleman, and in the USA, it's Patel, which means village chief or farmer. And while some people do seem to follow their name-based destiny, plenty of others have done exactly the opposite, including Archbishop Cardinal James Sin and Danielle Outlaw, the Philadelphia Police Commissioner. So clearly your name doesn't set your fate in stone. Still, naming your child is a lot of pressure, and despite the thousands of baby naming books and websites out there, studies in Britain have shown that 1 in 5 parents regret the names they chose for their children. Perhaps that has something to do with the recent rise in parents opting for quirky and unusual baby names. But it turns out that giving your baby a truly mental name isn't a modern phenomenon dreamt up by celebrities with too much time on their hands. With the exception of a few eccentrics like Elon Musk and Grimes, who named their son XAE, most parents today don't even come close to religious reformers, the Puritans, for cursing their children with truly appalling names. Court records from 1609 indicate that a certain Kilsin Pimple of Sussex served on a jury with his neighbours Fly Debate Roberts, More Fruit Fowler, Fight the Good Fight White, and Stand Fast on High Stringer. If there's one surefire way to get your child atomic wedgied on their first day in school, it's giving him the first name Fly Debate. Back in the 1600s, surnames were still a relatively new phenomenon, at least in Europe. They were brought in by William the Conqueror to make it easier for him to tax landowners, and they only became hereditary in England in the mid-14th century. Surnames usually came from either the father's name, the family occupation, a characteristic like being tall, or a location. So if your surname is Farmer, chances are your ancestors worked on a farm. This could perhaps go some way to explaining nominative determinism. After all, if you come from a family of farmers, you're probably more likely to become a farmer yourself. But family history can only explain so much, especially when it comes to first names. For example, the number of dentists called Dennis is significantly higher than would be expected based on the frequency of that name in the general population. And a similar trend can be seen for Denises, Dinas, Dennies, and Denvers. The most common explanation for this odd correlation is something psychologists call implicit egotism. In other words, we really love ourselves and therefore tend to gravitate towards anything that reminds us of us. Our unconscious bias towards things that make us think of ourselves also seems to exert some level of influence over other aspects of our lives, besides just our choice of career, from where we live to who we love. For example, there are a surprisingly high number of Virginias in Virginia, Jacks in Jacksonville, and Louis in St. Louis. Although this could just as easily be down to parents naming their children after where they're born, rather than people actively choosing to live in cities and states that sound like their names. Implicit egotism can also affect your dating prospects. It's been shown that people using dating apps are more likely to swipe right on people whose names sound more similar to their own, or at the very least start with the same letter. So far, I focused on how our names might be subtly dictating the paths we choose throughout life. But there is another side to all of this. Our names also influence how others see us. The sad truth is that people with unfashionable names are more likely to be rejected socially than those with trendy ones, at least according to several studies over the last decade or so. Even the way our names sound can affect how people think of us, and, good or bad, this can have a pretty significant impact on both our behaviour and our interactions with society as a whole. Look at these two characters. One's called Booba and the other's called Kiki. One's more outgoing, the other is more introverted. Which one do you think is which? There's a very good chance you picked Kiki to be the spiky character. Most people do. That might not seem like much of a big deal, but think about what that means. Subconsciously, we seem to associate certain kinds of words with certain kinds of attributes, and the same can be said for names too. For example, studies show that girls with more stereotypically feminine names are more likely to conform to gender stereotypes and are less likely to major in sciences and maths compared to girls with more androgynous names, whilst people with uncommon names are more likely to enter into unusual careers and often have a more creative and open mindset. Of course, it's difficult to pinpoint cause and effect here. Do people with unusual names favour unusual careers because their names make them predisposed to seek out the unorthodox? Or are parents who give their children unusual names also more likely to give them an unusual upbringing that makes them less inclined to spend the next 40 years being an accountant? Either way, having an uncommon name isn't always a positive thing, particularly for men. It's been linked to higher levels of male mental health disorders and loneliness. Studies have also shown that students with less common names are often given lower grades for the same quality of work compared to those with more common ones. These are all things you might want to think about when it comes to naming your child, but something you have rather less control over is your child's surname, which can also have a small but measurable impact on their performance in school. A study carried out by Professors Zaks and Corley from the University of Colorado showed that teachers are more likely to think of students with surnames at the top of the alphabet as clever compared to those with names at the bottom, possibly because they're used to seeing those names at the top of lists and registers. Students can easily internalize these biases, and it seems that those with names at the top of the alphabet regularly rate themselves as being more successful than those with names at the bottom. The impacts of this so-called alphabetism reach far beyond the school gates too. For example, one study found that people with X, Y, and Z surnames are more impulsive shoppers, which kind of makes sense if you spent your entire childhood at the back of the queue. A more serious example can be seen in hospitals, where one study found doctors spend around 4 minutes longer discussing the cases of patients with names at the beginning of the alphabet compared to those with names at the end. In most academic disciplines, authors of research papers are ordered in terms of the size of their contribution to the study, meaning the main author comes first. But in some subjects, particularly economics, the authors are listed alphabetically. That might seem like a fairly inconsequential difference, but the effect appears to be pretty pronounced. Not only is it easier to remember the author whose name appears first on a publication, but to anyone who's used to contribution-based ordering systems, it looks like those with names earlier in the alphabet have played a bigger role in the study than they necessarily have. As a result, economists with names near the top of the alphabet are a little more likely to hold high-ranking positions in university departments, become fellows of the Econometric Society, and even win Nobel Prizes. And it isn't just how alphabetically challenged your name happens to be that can have a negative impact on your prospects. A 2003 study found that people with traditionally white-sounding names were 50% more likely to be invited for interviews than those with traditionally black-sounding names, even when their qualifications were identical. As depressing as it may be to think that your name appears to be holding you back in life, there is at least a fairly easy solution. You can change it, and more people are choosing to do exactly that. In 2015, 85,000 people legally changed their names in the UK alone, although I'm guessing most of those weren't attempting to influence their name-based destiny. The biker gang leader, John Rothwell, changed his name to King Arthur Uther Pendragon because he believed himself to be the reincarnation of the legendary ruler. Bizarre Doo-Doo Zoppity Bop 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 chose his new name to reflect his infinite love for the universe, and probably marijuana. And Henry Schiff became Henry Lizard Lover because, well, he really likes lizards. Changing your name is in fact so easy that Asda worker Greg Lewis became Dr. Pasty Smasher Omelette just to win a bet. And Simon Smith woke up after a few too many beers with the new identity of Bacon Double Cheeseburger. One subsection of society that loves a good name change of a weekend are celebrities. For Peter Jean Hernandez, aka Bruno Mars, it was to avoid racial biases and stereotyping. But for others, it was just to add a sprinkling of star factor. Karen Elaine Johnson and Norma Jean Mortensen just don't have the same level of pizzazz as Whoopi Goldberg and Marilyn Monroe. Names are, of course, only a small factor in shaping our lives, and I should probably point out that all of the name-based trends I talk about in this video emerge only as small statistical differences from very large data sets. You aren't destined to become a failure as an economist just because your surname happens to be Zimmerman. You aren't guaranteed to be a straight-A student because your surname's Archer, and you can get yourself an amazing job no matter what your surname is or where you come from. Still, it is kind of interesting to wonder how life might have turned out differently had you ended up with a different name. Thanks for watching. Good news, you can now pre-order my new book, Bread and Circuses: What Did the Romans Ever Do for Us? It's a wild and witty journey for 1,000 years of unexpected Roman history, told in a refreshing way and packed full of incredible and unbelievable stories. Copies are selling out fast, so pre-order yours today to lock it in. Thank you.